Welcome to our Thursday night special Planning Commission meeting. Wish everybody an early happy holiday. We have a simple agenda tonight. We start on the plan institutional. We're going to focus on the setbacks tonight. We're going to go to 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, we'll open up for public comment and try to be finished by 9:30. So with that, we will turn it over to Kevin and Charlie to walk us through the process. One thing, tonight's my last meeting. My 8 years are over. I want to thank the commissioners for having me on this board, the staff, all my fellow members here. It's been a real pleasure. Learned a lot about the township and government and politics, and hopefully we've helped in the last 8 years. And especially one big thanks in the last 8 years, and that's to Sue Jones. Sue is our secretary. Everybody up. Sue is the one person for the last 8 years you call, what time's the meeting, where's the minutes, get me the copies, who's coming, who's not. She's there. It seems like 24/7, Sue. I know you go home sometimes. I know you live an hour away, you get here 11 o'clock at night, don't get home till midnight. But I want to thank you personally for everything you've done. You're a true asset to this township, so thank you very much. With that, Charlie and Kevin, let me kick it to you, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much. What we will primarily be discussing tonight provided you all with exhibits of the setbacks. I know that's been something that's been going on the last couple of meetings as to what the setbacks mean for the individual parcels. So I took the liberty of preparing some exhibits, which we'll have up on the overhead to discuss specifics for the different parcels. Beyond that, moving into 2013, if you were not aware, the commissioners had approved the Villanova petition to be sent down to you. That's something that we'll be starting to tackle kind of in a parallel fashion with that ordinance and the other ordinances during our regular meetings and continuing with the PI during our special meetings. My hope is that we can get a draft of the PI ordinance in some form or fashion ready for the commissioners by their March meeting, either the 1st or 2nd March. So we have tonight where we can kind of hopefully settle in on some setback issues, and then the January and February meetings to really kind of finalize the comments and then make any last tweaks at the March meeting. It would go to the commissioners as a recommendation, but then it may spend a meeting or two there before any changes would then come back to you for further consideration. So that's my goal, moving this process forward with kind of a deadline to shoot towards on the interim.
Kevin, do we expect the Villanova presentation to be to us in the first meeting of next year, in the January meeting then?
If you want a presentation, or we can, the presentation hasn't changed. The ordinance has from the original petition. My goal would be to get to you the ordinance for the January meeting for you to start digesting. We're going to have at least 3 ordinances for your consideration at the first January meeting. And then we have the Biomed ordinance amendment that's coming to you, as well as then the Villanova. But I want to get outdoor dining's coming back to you. Park and recreational land, and the athletic field lighting. Those 3 will be at your January meeting for recommendations back to the commissioners for a hearing in January, February timeframe.
Thank you. So, Charlie, I want to turn it over to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Charlie Schmale from Urban Research and Development Corporation. We're consultants to the township on the update of the Plan Institutional Zoning District. Kevin had prepared some exhibits in color that have shown some setbacks from the perimeter boundaries of the major institutions, particularly the colleges. And we also have aerial photos here that we can scale off as needed, as there's discussion items where people can come up and measure themselves to see how certain setbacks might affect certain areas. We had met back in October. The November meeting was canceled because of weather. No, yes, the November meeting was canceled because of weather. We had met back in October, and we had received a number of comments again at the October meeting, and we worked those into the draft. There's copies of that October draft on the back table if anybody wishes to pick up a copy. The latest changes from the previous draft are highlighted with being underlined. And then significant changes from the current ordinance are in italics in that draft. Before we dig into this, are there any overall comments or questions from the commission members?
I do have one comment I want to make, and I don't want to have a long discussion now about it, but I do think it's going to have a discussion. Literally, a light bulb went off in my head on the drive over here, and it's this. Most of the time, people do not come to planning commission meetings until or unless a particular plan or ordinance or something impacts them. That's human nature. Everybody's busy. That's fine. What literally dawned on me as I came over here tonight is that the institutions are not coming to this meeting. And I'm asking myself, why is that? Are they not really interested in a lot of changes to the ordinance? Because they're not coming to say things one way or the other. And the only institution that is coming, to my knowledge, or that's making any movements or overtures towards the township is Villanova, and they've made their feelings very clear because they're writing their own ordinance. So I guess my only thought tonight is, as we look at all of this and continue to look at the ordinance, is that we not look to overthink rehauling the ordinance as a whole, but continue to focus on tweaking the areas that we think would be of benefit to the residences, to the residential owners, because the institutions aren't coming out to say they want changes. So it suggests to me that they don't really care so much, that most of the institutions are not that negatively impacted by our current ordinances, or they feel they're able to work within our current ordinances, but that the things that are problems in the township with the PI have long-standing been problems that the residences are experiencing, so that our focus should continue to be improvements we can make to the ordinance that continue to protect the residential owners. Because it really did click with me tonight. They're not coming. And Charlie has told us he's not met with the institutions, and I don't think staff has had meetings with the institutions. We haven't had meetings with the institutions, and the institutions aren't coming out. So they must not be all that interested in big changes. And I just want to be aware of that in the back of my mind. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. Go ahead, Charlie.
Okay. Let me just give you a 2-minute overview of some of the things that are in this draft, and then we'll hit the setbacks as the main point. We have endeavored to target the regulations to where the primary public concerns are. For instance, the primary public concern is setbacks up against the residential areas and what happens at the borders of the institutions next to the residential areas. That's been, much of our attention has been focused on those areas. We also have been focused on saying, if we don't want institutions to build here, here, and here, where do we want them to build? Everything's a trade-off. Every time you squeeze something one direction, you get it in another place, and you need to think that through. We have been working on incentive systems, incentives that permanently preserve key areas of land next to the houses, incentives that help to have more environmentally sensitive development, greener, sustainable development. We have been working on refining many provisions, clearly stating exactly what uses are allowed where, and updating the list of uses and which uses deserve more attention. As an example of the environmental protection at the request of the township, we have added to the creek setbacks, the riparian buffer setbacks, for instance. We have been looking at different parking provisions. We studied a lot of different parking provisions that applied to a lot of different colleges across the country. The township came back and said they wanted to just tweak the current parking provisions that you have, and that's what we've done with this latest draft.
Excuse me, Charlie, when you
Yes.
say the township, Are you referring to us? Are you referring to staff? Are you referring to the commission?
All of the comments I've responded to have happened at these meetings.
Okay.
We have endeavored to write sign provisions that are more targeted to an institution as opposed to the same provisions that apply to some business areas. And we have generally been working on making the ordinance language much more specific. With that in mind, we were asked to concentrate on the setbacks at the beginning of this meeting. You see an example of a map up there that Kevin provided that shows example perimeter setbacks. That is Eastern on the lower right-hand corner, Cabrini in the upper middle, and the Military Academy, Valley Forge Military Academy and College in the upper left-hand corner. The township border is along the golf course there in the upper left side. That's 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 foot setbacks, correct?
Correct, yes. The purple on the screen is a 100-foot setback. Initially, in the draft, we were looking at the 500-foot setback, and the comments came up as to what does that mean for the individual campuses, and I have on other slides the other campuses. But it dawned on me that some of the parcels on the other campuses, and even on these, didn't provide a whole lot of developable area at the 500-foot. So I wanted to kind of space it out, so I did in even increments of 100 feet, starting at 100, calling all the way into the 500 feet, which we discussed.
Okay. Let me highlight for you a few of the setbacks that are in this draft. First off, if you are...
Charlie, before you do that, could you just remind the audience and the public what is the current setback? Just can you point to the
okay.
line that closest resembles that so we have a point of reference? Or
Okay,
Kevin,
if you
whoever
turn
can
to
do that.
if you turn to page 6 of the draft ordinance, you see that there is there's different setbacks depending on whether it's considered to be a more intensive institutional use or not. The Category 1 uses are things like classroom buildings. The Category 2 uses are things like student residence halls, recreation buildings, dining facilities, things that might have some more external impacts. So, for instance, you see from a residential district or an agricultural district or a parks district, it's 125 feet building setback for these less intense uses and 220 feet for the more intense uses. That is a 20-foot increase from the current for Category 2. Right now it's 200. If you're next to another institution in the institutional district, the setbacks are proposed to shrink because it's really not a matter of public policy whether Cabrini builds close to Valley Forge. That's their issue. That's not our issue. It doesn't affect any neighbors. And then the current setback is in place for setbacks from other districts of 75 feet. The one change that we did propose here is to base it upon the lot line. So if you're across the street or across the railroad tracks, we care about what the residential property line is, not the border of the institution. We're trying to protect the houses.
So say that again.
Okay. We're proposing to base the setbacks on the lot line of the receiving use, of the impacted use. So if the zoning district is the center of a highway, we don't need to buffer that highway out with a larger setback. The issue is the setback is measured from the residential lot if you have a larger setback. And that's why we bumped it up 20 feet to account for that additional length you typically get across a street, for instance.
Was that something you just, I was not at the October meeting. Was that something you discussed at October? At the October
I don't think
meeting?
it's been discussed in a great amount of detail.
Okay. All right.
And again, it comes down to trying to target the regulations to where there's the most public concern. So those are the straight setbacks for the buildings. There's also setbacks for parking, which is the setbacks for parking are what section are you on? Yes, yes. There's what I meant to say was there's also setbacks from a street for parking too. There has to be a vegetated area between the street and the parking area. In addition, and there also is the issue of height. Now, right now, everything institutional district is a 3-story height, 38 feet. It's actually hard to do modern architecture at times with 38 feet within 3 stories, but it's possible. What we have suggested to you is an option, and it all comes down to a trade-off. All comes down to the township proposing to give an option in return for something of public benefit. That option is to allow some taller buildings if the building would be at least 600 feet from the residential lot. So when you look at some of these maps, you would take the nearest residential lot and it would be beyond the furthest mark. Now, that would not apply from the whole perimeter. It would only apply from the nearest residential lot or park.
So hang on one second, Charlie. Back
Yes.
to Kevin for a second. So Kevin, one more time. The purple line is 100. The blue line is 200.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
So the red line represents the original 500
That's
feet
500.
that we were looking at, and I think what Charlie's proposing at the 600 feet, let's say off of Woodcrest Road, that setback would then be, in further from that red line for the taller buildings.
But it would not apply from the
But it would not-
eastern boundary,
yes.
the Eastern University boundary or the Valley Forge boundary.
Right. Would only apply on the residential side.
Correct. And it would also apply to a residence in Tredyffrin Township too.
Correct.
Not just Radnor.
Okay.
So we start off saying you can do a taller height of up to 5 stories if you're 600 feet away from a residential property line. That's 2 football fields of length. And you can only do that if you preserve land next to the houses. So in order to get the taller building, not only would you have to have a larger setback, but the institution would have to permanently preserve at least, I think it's 3 acres. That is on page 6. They'd have to permanently preserve 3 acres for each additional story. So if they wanted to do it's on page 6, option to preserve land adjacent to dwellings or parks. 7. Okay, I'm working off of the, not the red line. And the copies back there are not the red line. It's F, option to preserve land adjacent to dwellings or parks. So if there's 3 acres that the institution agrees to preserve next to the houses, permanently preserve it, they're allowed to do 1 additional story of building. And that building can only cover 1 acre. So there's some limit on how big a building. So you get 1 acre of building area for every 3 acres you preserve. If you preserve 6 acres, you can do a 5-story building. If you do 3 acres, you can do a 4-story building.
Excuse me, Charlie.
Yes.
It seems like there's 2 concessions for the college there. The height is certainly one, but the footprint is nothing that they're allowed to do right now either. I mean, it's supposed to be a 160-foot building. 160 by 160 is 25,600 square feet. So 40,000 square foot building is a material additional benefit to the institution.
Correct. We have proposed in a previous...
Per story.
We have previously proposed in item 70B that you could have buildings longer than 160 feet if there was variations in the building, if there wasn't one massive wall, if it had varying roof lines and varying setbacks, and if it looked like it was 2 different buildings connected together. Some of the greatest architecture in the world is much longer than 160 feet, and much of it has variations within the structure.
And I understand your point on suggesting that, but when you say we, I would have to say not I.
Okay?
And I'm not sure that that's something that we wanted to look at, but we are considering it. Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
But I just wanted to point out that that's 2 concessions from the current ordinance. height
Yes.
and footprint.
Yes. I mean, if you look at pretty much any historical architecture of colleges, it's often longer than 160 feet. I mean, you look at all of Yale's residential colleges are longer. I mean, much of University of Delaware is much longer buildings. University of Virginia, many of the historic architecture that people like most in colleges is longer than 160 feet, but it has variations in it. It's not just one big block building.
Well, we can visit Yale, but we have to live with Eastern and Villanova.
And aren't, I mean, New Haven's a city, and University of Virginia, and what's the other one? University of Delaware, aren't those, like, massive?
Well, again, if you have variation in the building, I think it makes a big difference. If you had just one big long wall.
You know, it's interesting, we had a plan Tuesday night, a parking structure, so it's not a building, but this was one of the things that we were kind of really encouraging the applicant to work on, and it's going to be a challenge for them, is to make a long structure not look like a long structure. So maybe the way to avoid that particular task is to not allow a long structure.
Which parking structure is that?
Cabrini,
Okay.
800 feet long.
800 feet long.
That's one of the things we need to change in our planned institutional zoning is we don't want to allow 800-foot long parking structures.
Again, it all depends how it's worked into the landscape. There was one other thing I was going to add in that direction. I mean, you look at Westchester Borough. I mean, they have some beautiful, and City of Lancaster, they have some beautiful parking decks that are long. They look like high-quality buildings from the front. So a parking deck does not have to just look like a Lego set.
Charlie, why does F say option to preserve land adjacent to dwellings or parks if you're talking about land that's going to be preserved next to residential houses?
Okay. If you read towards the end of that sentence, it says you can also put it next to a park or elsewhere where the Board of Commissioners designates as an important viewshed. This was particularly an issue, for instance, because we have the park near Eastern that people are concerned about. So if they wanted to preserve land next to that park, it could also apply there. So again, the proposal is that you can do 4 or 5-story buildings if you're at least 600 feet away from the nearest residential lot. That puts you towards the center of most of the campuses. It puts you far away from the housing, 2 football fields of length before you can do a tall building. We believe it makes a reasonable use of property. That as part of sustainable development, many communities are encouraging a little bit more height and a little less footprint. They're encouraging people to go up. It is much more energy efficient. There's less impervious coverage for the same amount of development, less grading, less removal of trees. There's a lot of environmental benefits going up a little bit. But the absolute tallest height would be 5 stories, 58 feet. That's the main setback provisions, and we'd like to hear any comments and questions, and then we can move on to other topics after this.
One of the concerns, I know that we had this conversation a few months ago, and I'm looking at Cabrini, I'm thinking of it, and there are some other institutions in the township. One of the things that we talked about with regard to a taller building is that some of our institutions are set on elevations that 58 feet would have, you know, a huge impact visually from a much greater distance potentially. And they're not, you didn't do them in these drawings. They aren't the college institutions. There's a couple of educational institutions. There's one on Roberts Road I'm thinking of. There's one on South Ithan I'm thinking of. But even looking at Cabrini's, and because of the way it's set on a hill, the visual impact could actually be far more reaching. If we're even going to consider this, how do we want to address that piece of it?
Okay, I was looking to see if I had my topo map handy. I know I printed one out. Here's one. You could not, because of the setbacks, you would need a very large tract of land to start with in order to do the taller height. You won't be able to do it on the average institutional property. You're pretty much limited to Cabrini, Valley Forge, Eastern, and Villanova. I don't think any of the other institutions, you couldn't do it on the Villanova Conference Center campus, for instance. You couldn't fit the setbacks on for the taller buildings.
What about St. Edmunds or the Presbyterian Home or Hilltop? Those are the institutions I was thinking of on Roberts Road and South Ithan.
Okay, I would have to measure out those distances. We do have the zoning map here, which is to scale. But most of the institutions are much smaller, and 600 feet consumes an enormous amount of land. It really does.
Charlie, I have up on the board the Villanova Conference parcel, and as you can see, 300 feet gets you into the very center of that. So, the 600-foot would not apply to this.
Kevin, what kind of, do you know, did Hilltop and Presbyterian and Rosemont Village, are they just not big enough to even apply for this?
I didn't look at those. Our discussions primarily focused around the universities in previous discussions, so that's why I focused these on. I can always go back and take a look at that.
I would just want to take a look, because
I'm sure the Hilltop's not. I don't know
I don't know how
Presbyterian
big
Village
Hilltop
that
is.
well, but it's not.
I've
like-
never been there, I don't know. And I
It's
can't,
it's 23, we had a chart last month, or 2 months ago, it's 23 acres total.
how big is Presbyterian or Rosemont?
Presbyterian is 42 acres, and Rosemont is not on here. Cabrini is 110.
Well, we would probably, Kevin, if I could ask you, just take a quick look at those. And Rosemont and Presbyterian might be too narrow. They're long, but they might be too narrow to meet the 600 feet for the properties that are abut them on, whatever that is behind it. That development chip bonded. Anyway,
I'm looking at the map, the topographic map of Cabrini, and the high point is up against the golf course. It's pretty far away from most of the houses. The high point is actually closest to the golf course and to Valley Forge on the Cabrini. St. David's golf course.
oh, that's St. David's behind it.
Yeah, St. David's is on the top,
Yeah, I didn't know that's what that was.
right?
So I mean, most of the residential areas, it would be the high point, if they would choose to build a taller building there. Well, first off, they probably couldn't do it because the 600 feet away from the houses, for instance, on Berwyn Circle, would probably knock out that high point anyway. You couldn't do it there. So you're really talking about the taller buildings would be more towards the center of the Cabrini campus if they decided to build one or two of them.
Right.
And then they'd have to offset that by preserving land, for instance, up against the houses that are over towards Woodcrest and Berwyn Circle. So that the net effect is, see, setbacks are temporary, easements are permanent. If we can give something away that's a slightly taller height, but we get a permanent conservation easement, the people can be guaranteed there will not be any buildings or ball fields or parking lots close to their house.
And the thing to remember, too, is that if we don't use this option and an equally large building is built at the two-story level, they have a lot of options for where they put those buildings, and we don't get any preserved land.
Right.
That's why, yes, it seems like you're giving something, but I think the township would really be getting a lot more long-term. Plus, I know that I might be in the minority, but there's a lot of advantages to those taller buildings apart from the fact that we're preserving land. I mean, the main one is that we're lowering the impervious surface on those sites, which helps our stormwater and our environmental issues.
But I thought that we talked 2 months ago about that in addition to letting them go up in height, we wanted a decrease in the calculation of their impervious.
Okay? What we did was we made revisions based upon your comments. And you see again those latest revisions underlined. And one of those under F, option to preserve land, was you either get a taller height for preserving the land or you get reduced landscaping. You don't get both. That was in response to your comments. It's not double dipping.
Reduced landscaping?
Well, reduced landscaped area. See, what right now you say that 55% of the whole property has to be landscaped. And that's a pretty restrictive requirement in the whole scheme of things. So we're saying that for every 3 acres for every acre of preserved land, you can do 3 acres less of landscaped area on the whole tract.
But doesn't that mean that they get to do more impervious? See, that's one thing about the PI zoning that has bothered me, is that what the intention of saying 55% of landscaped was, my understanding was it was intended to limit buildings and impervious to 45%. But it's a backwards way of saying it. If we want to limit impervious to 45%, let's just say we're limiting it to 45%. The way that you're doing the math here, then this would say it decreases the landscaped area, which by definition increases the amount of impervious, which is exactly the opposite of what we want to do.
See, push comes to shove, I don't know if the township could really make people keep 55% of their land landscaped. That's a pretty restrictive provision.
So you just limit it to 45% impervious. That's part of when I say I want to clean up the ordinance and don't want to reinvent the wheel. That's the kind of thing I'm saying. If we want to limit them to 45%, let's just say 45%. Let's not say 55% landscaped and have people have to think about it and do the math and be counterintuitive. And as evidenced by F2 here is actually allowing for more impervious building. And I don't think that was my intention. It says it decreases the landscaped area, which increases the area that you can make impervious. I don't want to do that.
I think it's...
I don't think that's what we meant. We were saying if you want to build a taller building, and what was your math? 160 times 160 is the maximum building we can do. If you want to go above 3 stories, then in addition to the setbacks, we also wanted to do a calculation where you can't even do whatever the square footage of 160, would you say 25.6? Yeah, it was going to be some percentage less than that because you were getting the benefit of going up. You were saving in the building costs of going up. We were saying if our maximum was $25,600, assuming a 1-story or a 3-story building, if you wanted to go up an extra story, then you can only do, 22,000 square feet. And this reads, as I said, in a backwards way, they can do more impervious.
I mean, when we talk about institutional districts, we're not just talking about the huge facilities with large land, we're also talking about some of the smaller uses too. Requiring 55% landscaping is an unusually strict provision.
Can I weigh in here? I think what we were trying to say was that if someone gets 4 times the amount of square footage in their building because they went up, that means that their footprint is 1/4, let's say, what it would have been. We want that other 3/4 to count as impervious.
That's right. That's what.
So this is going actually in the opposite direction. So what we wanted to say is if you save on your footprint, that equivalent footprint under the current code would be counted against your non-landscaped portion of your tract. Is that right?
Yes.
And the part that you preserve counts as landscape.
It's going to count as landscape because it is landscape.
And the part that's been preserved would count as landscape.
And that does, because it is, and that
And
doesn't.
Charlie, I think that'll work also because when we do talk about this, those smaller institutions where the 55% is not reasonable, this isn't going to apply to them anyway. They're not going to be putting these tall buildings in because they're not going to have the space for this part of the.
They could do the preserved land option to get the reduced landscaped area. I mean,
We weren't looking to do that at all. What
Okay.
we were looking to do was allow people to have taller buildings for efficiency, green space, ecology, everything else that we're talking about. We weren't really looking to relax our standards.
Okay. What I'm hearing you say is you want to remove F2, which is the reduced landscape provision in return for the easement.
But we also want to modify and replace it with something that equates the savings in footprint that can't be used as your landscaped area, the footprint that would have been required to get that building space. Am I right? Is that what we were thinking?
It's also about the height, remember, too.
Right, but the height
No, but that's exactly what we were saying.
factors
Regina.
into this, because by going higher, you're saving in a footprint, but we don't want that to count
No, but
in order to make people increase density.
Regina, 15 minutes ago, I was saying there are 2 concessions they get for locating
Now it's
in
3.
the center.
This reads it's 3. We don't have to keep it this way.
Right.
I think that there was a general confusion. I think we talked about it at one of the first meetings to get rid of the 55% landscape and just go with a straight impervious coverage, and that would be consistent with some of our majority of our other districts where it's not a landscape requirement, not a green requirement, but an impervious
Limit.
requirement.
Right. It's
And if you're looking at from a general perspective of allowing institutions to go up higher, you don't want it to be a one-for-one trade-off. So if you want to go 2 times higher, you don't want to cut the building footprint in half. You want to cut it into a quarter to allow them the flexibility to go up and incentivize going up versus going out. But going up 2 stories and requiring them to cut their building in half, there's no incentive to go up. And ultimately, we want to provide some incentive to go up so they're not going out as much.
I think at our prior meetings, we talked about how those buildings are better for the institutions because they're per square foot, they become cheaper in effect to build.
They're more energy
One
efficient.
roof, 4 stories, 2 stories, 1 roof, that kind of. There's something, but.
And, it's only 1 foundation to dig, but we didn't want there to be able to put 2 buildings of equal footprint when, under our current standards, they would have only been able to put 1 building of a similar footprint.
And then one of
That's
the-
what we were trying to avoid.
The other controlling factor to all of this is parking. When you look at the size of the building, all these buildings are going to require off-street parking, so there's only going to be so much space with an impervious coverage allotment that they're going to be able to go. So they're not going to be able to increase the buildings tenfold and not provide the parking. The parking is going to need to go somewhere. So there is a controlling factor as to how big, and you can go, you still have the building coverage requirement, so there's only so many buildings are going to be able to do at an increased height because there's only going to be limited areas. If you look at just these 3 campuses here, there's not a whole lot of area left to go if they were to meet these setbacks and still go up and still provide the parking.
But Kevin, Cabrini is tearing up a lot of their existing ground level parking and building structures for parking, so they can do it. And we're urbanizing these campuses a little bit by going this route, and we shouldn't fool ourselves that we're not doing that.
Yeah, and you can control the accessory structure height, so you want to limit the size of the parking garages. I think parking garages do have merit and allow you to, where you do have structured parking, provide increases in, you want to provide some density bonuses to allow, different type of development, not necessarily an increase in development, but a different type of development.
But I'm glad you used the word density because I was about to. Because this still leads towards the potential for more traffic from these uses because the uses are more dense, more square footage, more parking, even if it's in structures. And then when everybody leaves, they're on our nice little, occasionally state roads, but sometimes township roads.
Absolutely, and something that we can work into the ordinance is a traffic impact study provision, so that as any part of any land development comes in, no matter how small, that they're doing a detailed traffic study, so that then we can start looking at the impact that this development, this expansion, if there is expansion, you may have a university that wants to come in, and we were dealing with Valley Forge that wanted to tear down some buildings that were just built in the 50s and 60s that just don't make sense in today's environment and rebuild in a different configuration with no increase in capacity, but yet the ordinances were restricting them from doing that, and there would be little to no impact outside the campus boundaries.
I think one of the things, sorry to monopolize, I think one of the things that we talked about was trying to calculate what the institutions could actually build if they built under the current ordinance. And I think we all concluded that would be a very difficult task. But if that number could be ascertained or known, or the institution could produce it with some third-party source, maybe the way to approach this is if you're allowed to build 100,000 square feet, whether it's 5 stories or 3, that's it.
I agree with what Skip's saying. The way I look at this is we have an opportunity to improve what we have in our code right now. But in my opinion, anything we do cannot increase density. It's just not our task. And, for whether it's traffic, and you say, okay, well, we can do a traffic study. Well, if the traffic study, if they fail, what do? Do we then say no project? I mean, I think there's no reason we should change for an increase in density in any way, shape, or form. I think there's other incentives that could be given, but I really don't think incentivizing with increased density is even on the table.
I get back to the not wanting to overthink this and doing all the calculations about how much more they could build. I still think that if we sat here tonight, tomorrow night, next week, whatever, and actually talked about some regulations for parking structures and got those instituted, and if we talked about doing a calculation for parking that includes commuter students and graduate students, so that the impact on the streets is better reflected. We already corrected some parking a few months ago, which I think was a huge bonus for the township in terms of how the parking's calculated. But if we fix those two things, that would go a long way. Charlie, you said something earlier that I don't completely agree with, and had I been here in October, I would have said this. Buildings that are on a street where both sides of the street are owned by an institution, so therefore it doesn't impact. It does impact. It impacts visually, whether you feel like you're driving down Radnor that has very many open roads, or you feel like you're driving down Spruce Street or Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. Or even City Line Avenue, on the Philadelphia side where the buildings are very tall. So there is an impact even when the institution owns both sides of the street. And I'm very concerned with residential, but I'm not unconcerned with that visual impact. And also, I don't think that we can, emphasize enough what Skip said. The density spills out onto our streets. And I have yet to see a plan where two things happened, where the applicant's traffic engineer came in and said, you know what, we're going to have an impact, so we probably shouldn't do this project. Has anyone ever seen a traffic study come in and say that? It's never going to go that way. And what I have seen is some institutions, some traffic studies that have come in, and we've said, well, the intersection's failing, but we're not going to make it fail any worse, so they can still do their project. So, Kevin, with all due respect to making them do a traffic study so that we can memorialize that the traffic is worse. I mean, anybody who drives around Radnor knows the traffic's worse. So unless we can put some teeth into what the results of a traffic study can actually have, and I don't think that under the MPC we can do that. I'm not sure that a traffic study, making every single solitary project do a traffic study, is in and of itself going to help things. I agree having the information is good, and certainly anytime we can get the institutions to pay for any improvements that can occur at intersections is a good thing. But we don't ever turn them down from doing their projects, because most of the time these things are happening at failing intersections, and if it's already failing, then they're allowed to continue to do stuff.
If you're on a state road, PennDOT has much more authority to require off-site improvements than the township does. But if they're on a township road, you do have less authority to do that under state law.
So why don't we go back to the basic setbacks, because we drifted way back over again to some of the specials. Can we go back to either the red line page 7 or the black line page 6 and look back at the category 1 and 2? We had several changes and additions on the definitions of what's in category 1 and 2, and then what the basic setbacks are. I think if we start there, then we can move forward to the others.
And I just want to ask, the definition of what makes something category 1 versus category 2 is what impact what is the qualifier that causes something to be Category 1 versus Category 2? Is that a standard thing in the state, or is that
No, it's
a Radnor?
unusual. It's unusual, but I think it's a good idea you have in your current book. We just tried to refine it.
What's the qualifier?
In most communities, they
In
have
Radnor, what's the qualifier that causes something to be Category 1 versus Category 2?
It is external impacts.
Visual, traffic, noise, what are the...
Noise is the main one. I mean, a classroom building is not used at late night hours. A residence hall could be noisy at night, for instance.
Okay, see, but that's the thing. In Radnor, that's not true, because the institutions in Radnor have a lot of nighttime classes. That has become the big thing in Radnor. All these institutions, I hear the advertisements on the radios about nighttime classes. So when we're talking about impacts of noise, it's all well and good to think that it's a daytime thing, but some of these institutions are running 365 days a year because they have summer camps going, and most of them do, and into the evening because they're doing night courses, which not only are noisy at night, but have traffic later into the evening. So that's why I wanted to know from you, what are the qualifiers that cause something to be Category 1 or 2?
Part of it is that even though there's evening classes, they're still not very late night hours from the classroom buildings, versus you could get that from the residence hall.
Okay.
So
It's also visual. I mean, a utility building is often less attractive. A maintenance building is often less attractive than a classroom building, for instance.
So there's nothing stopping us from making...
I just wanted to know if we have a standard, let's think about what the standard is to make sure that things are appropriately placed in the categories. That's all I was trying to get at.
Well, so looking at that, do we have any suggested changes to what's now being shown as the Category 1 and Category 2s?
So, do we allow daycare centers on institutions? Isn't that a business?
Many institutions have daycare centers on their properties. We do have daycare center as an allowed use in the draft.
That's new though, right?
That's new.
Yes, that is new. It's underlined. It's
A lot
new.
of churches have them also,
But
and also schools.
In our planned institution right now, we have existing daycare facilities, is what you're telling us.
I would assume there are some. I don't know for a fact, but typically it is something that daycare centers prefer to be in a environment that is not extremely commercial. They don't want to be on a high-traffic highway, for instance. They like to be in an institutional type of setting.
So, but what this is saying is that, so we have daycare centers, children's home. I mean, what are we talking?
You have an existing children's home, and that's why it's listed, but it's a facility for people under 18 who need care and supervision.
Is children's home an accepted definition?
It is described on page 3 as to what it would include. 3 of the non-strikeout version.
Okay.
Page.
All right. So then daycare centers, we have,
two.
I'm looking at the more restrictive stuff first. Daycare centers, but it already says here that if it's located within a place of worship building, it's not required to have any larger setback than the place of worship. That seems reasonable, but if it's, okay. But then I would say, do we want more daycare centers? If they don't already exist, do we want more daycare centers on institutions? I guess we might if the people want to drop their kid
Right,
off
if
and they
you
work
wanna
at the
have it.
institution. Okay. I'm
There's a
trying
high
to think it
demand
out.
for the use.
Dormitory or other staff such as time. I didn't even think we had frats and sororities in Radnor.
They are right now inside dormitories, and that's the way the draft ordinance is written. You
Okay.
cannot have a freestanding fraternity or
that's what I
sorority. It
thought.
has to be in
Okay.
a residence hall that's owned by the college, and that keeps it under control. I lived in a fraternity in college, and I would not have wanted to have been my neighbor.
Well, one thing we don't see here is like a solar panel field.
We do not have that listed as allowed. You can do solar panels as an accessory use, customary, but we do not have solar farms.
Do we have to allow for those?
you should allow for them somewhere in the township.
That's what I'm saying. Do we allow for those somewhere in the township?
I would have to look at the code. I don't know where they are allowed, but if worst case, it would be in the other use ordinance. I know we're currently working with Peter's office on developing a variety of alternative energy ordinances and revisions to those where our codes are lacking.
Okay, but I thought I remembered reading, and maybe it's in the draft, I'd have to look at it, that we had something in here that said basically any educational use that a university has, they can do on their property. And if they do a solar field as, as part of an educational project,
It would have
Are
to be
we covered?
accessory in nature. I mean, I was at James Madison University a few months ago, and they had 6 solar panels as an experiment in the middle of a field. It wasn't a solar farm. It was an accessory use as part of a test.
okay.
So any questions on the ones or the twos as they're, everybody's okay with those?
By having single-family detached houses in here, I'm assuming because in some of our institutions, we already have them.
Correct, and sometimes they build them for their staff.
Yeah, they could build up
Okay.
their staff.
But this would no way, shape, or form allow some of the universities who own single-family detached houses to make a case that they can convert those residential zoning districts to PI, right?
The boundaries of the institutional district are not proposed to be changed, and that's what your comprehensive plan says, to keep the
Okay.
boundaries the way they are. Ownership is not the primary issue there, it is use.
Use.
And the use is regulated by the district.
All right, so with those as the categories that are now proposed, let's go over to the,
Wait, one thing on the categories. I noticed you mentioned parking structure, which shall be regulated as building, as we requested, because that's something that's come up with us. Is this the main place where that's stated, or is that stated
I think
elsewhere
it's also in a definition at the back. Yes,
Okay.
it's in the last page, too.
Because that's been such a hot button item for
We
us.
put it in twice.
Okay.
Some things you want to repeat.
so the category ones, we are not proposing an additional setback, and the category twos, we're proposing to go from 200 to 220 feet.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I do have one more question.
Go ahead.
Under category use 2, in the case of a hospital, surgery center, medical center, nursing home, or other similar health facility, no more than 50 beds shall be permitted on a lot of not less than 5 acres, in excess of 5 acres. Okay, are we good with those numbers? Those are, we thought those out.
They were from the current book.
Yeah, they're
We
what
didn't
currently
change
have.
them.
No, I know, are we still good with them? It just kind of caught my eye. They're good.
Charlie, I had a detail question for you. In the red line version, the bottom of page 3, there's one line, the very last line says the maximum impervious, I'm using small print here, coverage of any individual lot shall be 70%. Is that a typo?
Well, see, what happens is there's an overall tract and there's an individual lot.
Hold on. Let's come back to that and try to stay on the step backs for a second. Let's try to get through this. So, one more time, category 1 and category 2, are we okay with the changes? So based on that, the setbacks, we're proposing no change to category 1, except to add the language when it's PI versus PI to add a 50-foot setback.
So the following property lines.
Okay?
But then the property lines are not specifically spelled out. It seems
do you
vague to
mean?
me to just say, you're working on page 7 now, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so read at the bottom of uses and structures shall be set back from the following property lines. Category, pardon?
I'm sorry, where are you again?
Bottom of 6, where it says 3.
Okay.
Uses and structures shall be set back from, and they struck out rear and side, the following property lines in accordance with the following table.
Right.
But then the property lines,
Choices are lot lines of land in adjacent zoning district, and then there's the lot lines would be to
Right.
residential agricultural or to the continuous PI or all other districts. Those are the 3 choices.
so is this, by saying it that way, it doesn't matter which side of the property it is. Is that what we're saying? Or is
We're
this
trying
making it more
to
vague?
cover everything, because some people turn buildings and say, no, that's the front, that's the rear, this is the rear, it's a triangular lot. We say everything's treated the same. It makes it easier.
So no more front, back, side, it's all that.
Yes.
Charlie,
See,
the
when I
one-
read the property, the rear and side property lines, I thought they meant of the other property. They meant of the PI property.
Of the PI property.
Okay.
There's setbacks from a street and there's setbacks from a lot line.
No matter what they are.
But your new setback, your new 220 is from the property line of the residential property. So the street, in other words, there's the line of that residential property, there may be a public street, and then there's the PI property. So it's 220 from the non-right-of-way of the residence to the building.
Yes.
But
Well,
doesn't
the
that,
old one was 200 feet from the edge of the PI property.
Right,
So-
we're trying to target it because the house is the primary thing we're trying to protect.
But most cartways are not, right-of-ways are not 20 feet, so we actually gave back 20 feet.
The zoning boundary is usually the center line of the right-of-way. The right-of-way is typically 50 feet. For a local road, it's 25 feet, so actually you've given up 5 feet.
Okay.
well, why would we give up 5 feet?
If you want to make it 225, I'm not going to argue the point.
Well, if we were supposedly, okay, all right.
Well, but that's my point, is that why aren't we keeping it from the edge? Why aren't we just keeping it from the edge of the PI property so that it doesn't matter how wide the road is? Why are we making that change that might, in some cases, bring it closer to a residential district? 220 or 200 or whatever the number is from the PI property line means it doesn't matter how wide the road is. Why would we make a change that might bring it closer to some residences in some cases? That, to me, is a complicated way of doing something when we had a simple way, and the complicated way might be of detriment to a residence. Why would we do that? Why would we make that change? That's what I'm asking myself.
So what are you suggesting? You're
That we
saying-
skip this, the wording used to be that the setback was from the edge of the PI zoning.
Okay.
Let's just keep it at that.
And the zoning is the property line.
The edge of the,
institution line rather than.
yeah, the edge of the PI zoning, because a lot of institutions are buying up residential houses
so-
around
so-
them.
so-
And I remember we discussed that. I said we wanted to make sure in no uncertain terms could a university or a college buy up residences and start counting that as their setback line. So if we just say to the edge of the PI zoning line, then then it doesn't matter how wide the road is.
Okay, we can go back to that.
That makes sense.
Well, in some cases, the zoning district boundary lines are not very consistent with property boundaries and/or center lines of roads. And in many cases, in certain areas of the township, the property boundary goes to the center of the road. So if you want to keep it from the side and rear property lines of the institutional parcel, and then from the right-of-way line of the institutional parcel, that's going to be your most restrictive setbacks versus
And that's
going
what
off
we want.
of the center line of the road or a zoning district boundary, which if you look at a lot of the zoning map, there's split zone parcels all over the place and slivers that cut across properties. It's not a very consistent way of doing it. The most restrictive way is from the parcel boundary, the side and rear parcel boundary of the institutional parcel, and then from the right-of-way line of the institutional parcel. Because most cases, the property line of the institutional parcel, for example, Cabrini Road will go out to Eagle Road or out to King of Prussia. It does not stop at the right-of-way line.
So what you're saying is if you go with what you just suggested, it's going to be more conservative in all cases, or equal?
It would be more restrictive for the universities. So you get a greater setback from the adjacent residential properties if you measure from the property line and from the right-of-way line versus the center line or from the zoning district boundary.
So there wouldn't be a case that would be changing, basically, in a negative way towards a residential property. If we were to go with the new language you're proposing, it would only benefit residents.
Typically, you're going to get the greater setback from the property line. The way the zoning boundaries have been delineated does not follow the property line, does not follow the center line of the road in all cases. So if that case, you could have a portion of the residential zoning district, you could have an institutional parcel be split zoned with a portion of it being residential. If you're taking it from that zoning boundary line, it could, you're not going to get a consistent setback along the edge of the parcel.
Okay, we'll make that change.
Okay?
And then we go back to 200?
Yes, because you've gotten rid of the reason for the change.
One change you don't want to miss here is that between contiguous lots of PI district owners, it's only 50 feet. That's new.
What
Yes.
did we used to have?
I don't think we had any.
Nothing.
Nothing. I think it was the same for all. I think there was a huge boundary theoretically between Valley Forge and Cabrini or Eastern.
Was there, because when we asked them to think about moving that parking structure up to the north part of the property, were they within, did they have to keep the building within the 125 because of how it's written now? No.
In the red copies, I think that's new language. So I don't know if we want that.
Well,
But curiously,
Well, that's what-
Eastern wasn't here complaining about the 800-foot building at Cabrini either.
Right. As you said, having showed up to talk about it, so. An 800-foot-long building that one,
Doesn't anybody else think the kids are parking there?
right, they're probably happy.
And,
So-
and let me
No, we want to
emphasize,
encourage them to build next to the other institutions.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm fine
right.
with
I don't have a
that.
problem.
Yeah, no,
I think
I'm
it's
fine
okay.
with that one.
and we do have a tree preservation provision that's new here that would apply, for instance, along Eagle Road and King of Prussia Road and some other roads. So you could not build right up against the road. You'd have to maintain a tree preservation area. I believe it's 75 feet on each side of the road.
And the right-of-way of a rail line, what's the thought process there?
The idea is that, let's say, for instance, the SEPTA rail line goes through the center of Villanova's campus. Do we really need a large setback from that? I'd say we don't.
Well, except that throughout the township, the railway, particularly in Garrett Hill, it's right next to residential people, so
We
Yeah,
still want to
residential
make sure
applies.
that the residential district lot setback applies,
well, that was going to be my question. So,
regardless of whether there's a rail line in between. It says
Yeah.
this setback shall apply even if separated by a street or rail right-of-way. So the residential setback still applies.
where does it say that? That's what I wanted to see.
The first
section,
row,
Top of 7, right here.
it's
Setback
underlined.
shall apply even if the lot is separated by a street or rail right-of-way.
Oh, right underneath it.
Right there.
Uh,
Page 7 of the red line, page 6 of the black line. In the little midsection, if you look at the black line in the section below the second line, in the parentheses.
Okay.
So we're going back to 125 and 200, but changing the definition.
Got it.
50 and 50 on the contiguous lot within the PI district, and then the 75, all other districts are the right-of-way of a rail line. Now, is everybody okay with that? Any further comment, discussion?
So these 50-foot setbacks only apply to the types of uses allowed in those areas. We're not talking about the restriction on building height here. This has
No.
Nothing to do with
totally
height, just-
unrelated, right?
correct.
It's only to do with use, the types of uses. Okay.
I just want to look at the strikeout of F and make sure that we're okay with the impact of that.
Nobody quite knew what that meant.
We're not there yet. Let's not go to F yet. Are we okay with the paragraph above? Are we okay with the category 1 and 2 setbacks the way they're now stated? Everyone's okay with that?
Well,
Great.
there's one in category 1 that I'm still not sure. Why we're identifying single-family detached house. Are they there now?
They're there now or could be there.
And we just didn't discuss them before? Why are we?
You need a 10-acre lot size to do anything. So you cannot subdivide off new houses on these institutional properties. So you're really talking about building a house for staff, or an existing house for staff.
So currently, they would not be permitted to build a house on their campus.
I'd have to look at what the current book says.
Currently, no, it is a permitted Category 1 use.
Currently?
Yes.
So that's really not, because it's underlined, I'm wondering why we're adding that.
The term may have changed a little bit.
So it's not that we're adding it. So that's just status quo. Okay, and then the other one, the daycare center. Provided that the daycare center located within a place of worship building shall not be required to provide any larger setback than the place of worship. I'm kind of confused by that.
Okay, what happens is often you have a church and then they put a daycare center in later. And we don't want a situation where you can't put a daycare center in an existing church.
I'm not sure that we don't want that situation. I mean, is there going to be an impact to someone because of that? Because there's some churches that people live right next door to, aren't there? And
They have
right
to be
now,
in the institutional district to be affected, and generally the
Okay.
smaller churches are not in the institutional
okay,
district.
so this is only on the larger properties.
Well, it's on any property, but
It has to be in
but
the
you're saying
institutional
if the
district.
church has a 125 setback and the church is existing, the daycare can be within that 125. If it's not adjacent to the church, then it has to be the 200. If you had an existing church who came in here tomorrow and wanted to build a daycare under this new zoning, we don't want the church to be 70, or the daycare to be 75 feet away from the church.
I guess what I'm thinking about is non-conforming buildings. How does that play into this? If there's a building that doesn't conform and they want to put a daycare center in, will they then be allowed to do that even though they're not within the proper setback?
If they're in the institutional district, and again, that's the larger property, so that the churches in the smaller lots are not in the institutional district. Only the churches on the larger properties are in
Right,
the
but even if you
institutional
had
district.
one in a planned institution and it was, non-conforming, existing building, are they allowed to put a daycare center in if it doesn't conform? Like they're right up on the property
Conform
line?
to what, the setback?
Yeah, the setback. If they're not, if they don't meet the current setback and they want to put in it, I mean, it could be, I don't know if the scenario exists, but it could be that there's one that's near a neighbor and it's within that setback. Would they, because they're within this, because they don't have what we're requiring as a setback, would that preclude them or would that allow them? That's my question here.
So you're saying you want to add language there that would say, provided that the
They have to
house
meet
of worship is not in a non-conforming.
something like that, because I don't know if that exists or doesn't, but rather than open that up.
That'd be a loophole. We'd certainly close that loophole, right?
If you wish.
Another way to address it would be to limit the size of the daycare center to 50% or 25% of the footprint of the church. Because there could be a lot of churches that are on such small parcels of land they can't provide the daycare unless they have it in the church, which is probably not what they want to do. But if you think that they should have the ability to have a small daycare center, size it to the lot or to the church.
I mean, we can
Oh,
all.
hang on a second.
Yeah, do we have anybody that applies to that?
Regina, let me just see if I understand you. Basically, what you're saying here is we would allow it, if there's a daycare center, it's a Category 2 use, and all of the setbacks that we said for Category 2 would apply. If there's a daycare already in a place of worship, already in existence, it's already conforming or not anyway.
I think she's
It
talking
doesn't
if there's a
matter.
new one. If there's
But
a-
if it's new, but this kind of doesn't even address that.
Yes, it does.
No. If it's new, you could just simply say daycare center, and then it has to conform to the 200. If it's a new daycare center that they want to put into a place of worship, Regina's saying she only thinks it should be able to go into an existing house of worship if the house of worship is conforming to the setbacks, is what she's saying.
We're next to the house of worship if it's conforming.
See, I think Charlie was trying to say it could be next to the house
it
of
could be next
worship
to it.
without regard to the setbacks. And Regina.
This says within, it doesn't say next to.
But if it's already non-conforming, wasn't your intent that?
But, so my point is that we could just simply list daycare center, boom, or daycare center, and as a separate line, daycare center within a house of worship, providing the house of worship is conforming to setbacks.
Well, I think that's different than what it says this minute.
I know that. I'm trying to clarify what
If you
Regina
don't,
was saying.
I mean, I don't think it's going to come up very often in this
really.
situation, so if you just want us to say that the daycare has to conform, that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm
leave it
not
at
going
that
to.
and be done with it.
So
Well,
we'll just strike on
Let 'em
where
come
it
in-
says,
let 'em come in for
Charlie.
variance if it-
Charlie, the problem is here is that the courts of Pennsylvania, under different factual circumstances, but the general rule, the courts have viewed a daycare as a natural accessory use to a church. There's been townships that try to say churches cannot have daycares within their boundaries or as a part of their of what they offer to the community, and the courts have struck that down, saying no, you can't. It would be kind of like saying you can have a single family dwelling, but you can't have a kitchen in it. So I think those whole line of cases are going to impact where if you're going to try to say you have an existing church and that church then decides to establish a daycare center, and we're saying, sorry, you only can establish it if the church has a 200-foot setback, I think from a legal standpoint, we're going to have some problems dealing with that issue. The courts are going to look at it as, the church is there. This is an allowed part of a church. You can't try to use a setback as a means to keep it out of that particular church.
Well, thank you, and that's why I was trying to clarify what Regina was trying to say, but moreover, I wouldn't have had a problem with a daycare center or a place of worship being Category 1, frankly. Personally, again, it's their, well, let me tell you why. We've put surface parking as Category 1. What's more troublesome about a church? That people are inside worshiping, or the cars that are trying to park? And the parking lot, we're already letting it be in Category 1. I mean, it's the traffic on a Sunday morning that's...
Category 1.
Right.
But the daycare center that's inside of it,
It's also in Category 1.
no, it's in Category 2.
But a daycare center by itself is in Category 2, but a daycare center located within a place of worship shall not be required to provide any larger setback than the place of worship, which is in Category 1.
But that's what I'm trying to say, is that, Julia, that's what I'm trying to say, is two things. First of all, that's why I didn't think all that extra stuff after daycare center was necessary. I thought it was confusing. In fact, we've been talking about it for 10 minutes, kind of shows that. But beyond that, just my own personal feeling was that daycare centers don't bother me that much. I would have said Category 1 for a daycare center, personally. People may not agree with me. I was just saying that.
I guess the traffic becomes the issue, and I think what would clarify maybe is to have daycare center listed in Category 2, and in Category 1 to have daycare center within a place of worship. And
We can do that.
This way you don't open up. I'm just concerned that you're opening up something that you're not looking to open up, because if you have a place of worship that has no setback and they want to put a daycare center in, and maybe it's an accessory structure, and then here we have a problem because they don't have the setback, but yet here we're saying they can do it. I don't want to open anything up.
okay, we'll make that change.
What is a life care residence that's different from a nursing home, assisted living center, or personal care center?
It's not as common a terminology as it was a number of years ago. Life care is where you pay one fee and then you can move from place to place within the facility as you need more care.
And
I don't
those
know
are
if they're
allowed
even
on,
building any new ones.
and that's allowed on planned institution? That's an allowed use on a planned institution as a
It's-
life care center?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a personal care nursing home is what it is, with maybe some independent units in it.
Well, I guess that's getting, institution, is that in, oh, it's its own institution. I keep thinking on a college campus.
Although
I gotta separate out.
there are colleges that have built retirement communities as part of their campus.
I just had colleges on the brain.
It's a currently allowed use that we didn't propose to change.
Any other changes to the Category 1 or 2s, or the setbacks? Okay, now let's go to paragraph F.
Yeah, when we looked at this previously, no one knew what it meant, so we had agreed to delete it. page 7 of the strikeout version. I think it's page 6 of the other version.
I think it's saying what I said before. When a university buys up and completely surrounds buys up enough property that they can basically swallow up a neighborhood, and to the extent that the property on both sides is owned by the same institution, they get to have a smaller setback.
Well, in any case, we had agreed to strike it. It's out
No,
of the
so
current
that's
book.
good.
It's
So
out of
everybody's
the
okay to
current
take it
book,
out?
and we had agreed to take it out previously.
Let's keep it out.
Keep it out.
So let's try to finish, because it's 5 and 9, with paragraph F, the new paragraph F.
And we had previously made a change here where the additional height would not give you a landscaping reduction.
Right.
We already agreed on that.
Well, I said that it appeared that there was a double concession, that the footprint of the building went from 25,600 feet to 40, and the height went from 38 to 58. And I'm not in agreement with that.
Could I make a request? F is really like the heart of this whole ordinance. And maybe we should hear if anybody from the public wants to say something about F before we delve. I mean, it really is.
We're scheduled to have public input in a couple minutes.
Yeah, so let's not delve too long on this.
Since we're still on it, though, for a second, the 3 acres of, or whatever, of conservation easement, do you envision that, or should we clarify that to have a minimum depth? I mean, I can see certain possible arrangements here where you have like a 1,000 by 50-foot strip, and it doesn't really do that much for the neighbors necessarily.
We can increase the depth. Right now, it's a 50-foot minimum. That's on the shallow side. It should be increased. I agree with you.
So what, Charlie, what do you think that should be? Should be 75 or 100? What do you,
I think 100 gives you something substantial.
really pushes it back?
Where it says existing dwellings.
Where are you?
Third line of F1. And again, I still don't even really like this, but I'm sure Seth's going to comment on it. Don't we want to make sure that they're not establishing a conservation easement against property that they own, that an institution owns?
They would be unlikely to do that because they want to connect things. And they want to calm the neighbors by giving them an easement so they won't feel threatened.
But if we say that a butzer is across a local street from
we could add
residential
that,
zoning not owned by the institution.
we could add that. It's harmless. We can add that.
Is that residential zone?
Well, wait a minute. If an institution owns residentially zoned properties across the street, they can sell them. You still want to protect that as residential uses, no matter who owns
no,
them.
Julie, I'm sorry. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that I don't want them to pick land, because it's all it says. If they establish a conservation easement near, that prevents blah, 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 that abuts or is across the local street from existing dwellings, they might preserve land right next to their own property that they own.
The land they're preserving has to be within the PI, is what you're saying.
No, Sue's saying it should be not against their property. It should be against.
She's saying that
No, I think what she's saying is they could use their residential areas as their buffer.
No.
No?
Well, I'm saying, it says, if an institution establishes a conservation easement, boom. They're picking where the conservation easement is. The way this reads, it says, if they pick a conservation easement that abuts or is across the local street from existing dwellings. Let's just stop right there. Dwellings, we mean residences. I don't want there to be a situation where they're getting to pick the land. They're getting to decide where they would put the easement. So let's make it clear that it needs to be an easement next to residential zoning not owned by that institution.
Because by selectively positioning the easement, you enhance the market value of the houses you bought then you could sell the houses for more than they were originally
what-
purchased.
So we
Well,
just
why do you
simply
care?
say
No, it wasn't even about that. I just
Well,
wanted
it's
to be
a
the
way
most
of looking
benefit
at
to
it.
other residents.
privately owned dwellings are not owned by the institution. We can easily add that.
I just want the benefit to actually be closest to neighbors who are not.
No, I don't
Unless
agree
they
with
sell
that.
I think that could become,
I don't.
that could become an issue
Because they might not always be owned by the
Yeah.
institution. They're privately, it's a residential zone district. I'm assuming single-family homes in most areas. The institution may at this time own those properties.
Right.
But they're zoned residential. We're not going to change that zoning.
Right.
So we want to buffer those houses as much as any other houses, because long-term, they may not
They
be
may
owned
not
by
be
the
owned by the
institution.
But why would we want, I'm not saying, okay, so I hear what you're saying. I do, so I'm not trying to prevent it from happening there. I'm trying to figure out a way that they would pick places that would be of most benefit to residents who aren't university at this point. I hear what you're saying.
I can't imagine that there's not going to be a lot of discussion about where those easements go.
Well, I think Skip did raise a good point, though, because say they own a property, several properties, whatever, and conserve the area behind them, then those areas that they own on the other side would go up in value. So that is a bit of a concern. I don't know how to
And
address
that's a
it.
value to them, but it's also a value to the township as a whole, because there's preserved land.
Not if no one else can see it, if it's in their
Oh,
backyards.
it's still a value if it's preserved and not built upon. It's still an ecological value, it's an impervious surface value.
Okay, but I still think existing dwellings should be specified to say in a residential zoning.
Well, I don't
Residentially.
think existing dwellings.
Because existing dwellings-
Should be residential land, period.
Yeah,
Well,
I was
no-
going to say, there are also people who own residential lots that aren't built on, and they're not owned by the institution, and those should also be
Just
considered,
residentially zoned
so-
properties.
And I
Charlie.
think we also wanted to do parkland.
Well, that's in the bottom of this thing, that's later down in this provision.
And I'm not following the value. So if they did that, picked land, residential lots that they owned, pick that spot for the easement to be reduced or increasing their own value of their properties to sell them back to residents, wouldn't we be thrilled? Wouldn't we applaud that? So I'm not quite sure where the.
Well, that's what I'm
negatives-
saying. I don't think you can fix that anyway. Even if you
Right.
didn't like it, I don't think there's any way you can fix it. Because they could own a house in a string of,
Yeah, residential, I don't want to leave it to dwellings.
but they can also own a house in a string of other houses, and they're not going to, what are they
Right.
going
Yeah,
to
let 'em do it.
disinclude that street because they own one of the houses on that street? I don't think you can really
Yeah, I don't
fix.
think they can control that.
But I just wouldn't want to see it worded in such a way that didn't include a buildable lot.
Got it. We'll make that change. Are we at 9 o'clock? I don't have my watch with me.
We're at 9 o'clock.
Yes,
So
let me ask
we're-
this one
go ahead,
question.
one more, Sue, your
No,
last
just-
one.
One additional story shall be allowed for each 10 feet in additional height. What does that mean?
That means that we don't want a situation where somebody tries to squeeze an extra story in. You know, if they got, I don't know, maybe they have midgets in their class, we don't want them to be able to squeeze in an extra story. So we're saying you get an extra 10 feet on one story. You don't get anything more than that.
Got it, thank you.
Especially when you got peaked roofs, people can play games with stories.
Okay, now we will go to public comment. Do we have any public comment? Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Colleen Price, and I live at 352 Shimoni Road in St. David's. The first thing I see is this was a big change from the last time. This whole idea of a setback of 50 feet as long as it's a contiguous lot with colleges on both sides. That would mean, the way I read it, all of Lancaster Pike has Villanova on both sides, contiguous lot, both PI. You've just made the entire setback 50 feet all along Villanova, all along.
Hang on, Colleen, I don't think
There
so.
are
Charlie?
setbacks from streets.
Right.
And the setback from the street still applies, and that, I believe, is 120 feet on the north side, 40 feet on the south side of Lancaster Avenue is what's
Right.
proposed.
Where
So-
does it say that?
Well, I think, Colleen, the way it reads, a continuous lot within the PI district, and then, so it
I'm telling,
doesn't,
if I were them, I would say where I am, across Eagle Road is a contiguous lot.
well, it's
To
not.
PI, you got 50.
It's not, it's not contiguous.
It's
Sure,
120
they're right
feet
next to
from a
each other.
street on page 4 of the non-strikeout version, which is probably 5 of the strikeout. D, setbacks from street. There's setbacks from lots and setbacks from streets.
Is there wording that we could put into a contiguous lot within the PI district, occupied by an existing principal use? Just like we made the clarification that above it, that the setback applies even if the lot is separated by a street or railway. Is there a way to make a clarification there that the street on, that Lancaster Avenue or Eagle Road can't be used to count as a contiguous lot? I mean, let's do something to protect that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I just don't know
Yeah,
why it
no,
even
no,
got inserted in
absolutely.
here. It wasn't here in October. I don't know who asked for it. And this whole idea of this conservation easement in the 3 acres, I mean, Eastern's probably got 40 acres that are wetlands. They could give you that. They can't build on it anyhow.
There is an exception for that. You can't count wetlands or floodplain for the easement.
Or steep
mic on,
slopes, or whatever's in your setback. I mean, just leaving it up to someone to give you 3 acres where they designate, I think, is a problem. And I disagree with where the properties are. I know Valley Forge Military Academy owns a ton of properties on Radnor Street Road. I mean, you wouldn't want them to put I think that conservation easement between on those homes, like you said, because it makes it more marketable. If you're trying to do something to appease your neighbors by getting this huge growth, then it should be where the neighbors are who are going to be impacted, not where the people who already work for the university are living in your properties. I mean, honestly, I have so many things to say as it comes up. It's really, really hard to get up 2 hours later and go back over points. I know we're trying to get through this, but we've never had our sit-down neighborhood meeting. I don't know how you think this is going to happen in March. There's really been so little input that we can get. I mean, if you want to go over this, I think we should have a line-by-line discussion. I think you should stop after each provision and have people get up and discuss it. And then you're talking about these, 5 and 6 foot heights. I know the people on Cornwall, when we worked out that whole deal with Eastern and they were going to do an internal route, everybody thought it was great. They were closing off Fenimore's and that fantastic. And then these poor people on Cornwall come in and say, wait a minute, now you're going to have all this traffic and all these lights going right into our bedroom at night. Nobody even thought about that. No one was trying to, give them the worst end of the deal, but that's sort of what happened. And I think those people would be really impacted by that huge swath that you have in the middle of Eastern, and trying to downplay how much area is, if you want to go back to that slide, it's a gigantic portion that could be 6 stories on Eastern, and that entire neighborhood will see it. I mean, that won't impact me, but it will impact my neighbors. Look at the size of Eastern. That could all go 6 stories now. And it goes back to the whole philosophical intent of why are we changing this? If you're going to go up to 6 stories and build up these whole centers, do you want more college students in Radnor? If that is your intent, then say it. I don't think anyone has that intent. We're already there. They're a third of our population. I don't know why we're even talking about increasing the heights. And I think that it is a real problem going up 6 stories to a lot of people for a visual aspect. And this whole idea, when you're talking about the daycare, this is just sort of jumping back on that whole daycare issue. You're assuming that it has something to do with the institution. The way they've rewritten this ordinance, the daycare doesn't have anything to do with the institution. It can be a commercial, for-profit, whamma-jamma daycare like you've never seen before. They have set up all these uses that we used to think that were done in conjunction with a college are all separate. You don't have to have anything to do with the college at all. This can be a commercial daycare. That's the way it's been rewritten. And you can be a commercial trade school, the way they've done it. They've separated.
Trade school was removed.
Yeah, but why would it even put in there? I mean,
There's a need for trade schools, but it was deleted in response to comments.
again, I think it would be useful to listen to your residents, not people who at this point I think have come up with some pretty crazy ideas, not to mention, we'll figure out the parking after we find out we have a need for parking. But I'm just trying to point that out, that a daycare could exist in and of itself. And these lots could now just be a parking garage. Someone could just buy Hilltop, Villanova could, just put up 6-story parking garage. The entire property doesn't have to have anything to do with college uses and principal use as an educational institution. That's a major change that happened here. Again, I'm trying to point that out. I know that was earlier, but it does impact. And then on this whole idea of the traffic study, I have looked forever, and I finally found what they do in Lower Merion. When a college comes in, or what they have, schools, parks, places of worship, and other public facilities, everything gets done by a conditional use approval. And they ask for a traffic study, and their traffic study has teeth, unlike ours, where we can say, here's your traffic study, you guys are not going to be able to move, and we have to say, well, thank you, approved. What happens in Lower Merion, they cannot build anything if they are going to I'll read it out. The traffic generated by the proposed access shall not result in a level of service lower than a C at any adjacent intersection. If the service level is already below a C, then the additional traffic shall not lower the service level or increase the average delay by more than 10 seconds per vehicle. Now, I'm not a traffic expert, but at least it gives you some sort of idea of how a traffic study should go. That there is, you can't just say we're at an F and we're just going to go to a Z and we don't care. We're at F and we just stop. There is some language in Lower Merion's ordinance that talks about doing it under conditional use, and they do have traffic impact study requirements. So I don't know if that's on the avenue I always thought we should go. It's not in here at all that there should be, conditional use approval of these types of things. I think that's it. I got lots more, but and the setbacks too. Take it. If you want a 200-foot setback on all your institutions, just take it. We're allowed to do that. We don't have to sit here and barter and beg with institutions who aren't even here asking for it. I don't know why we're dropping to 50 feet or 70 feet or 100. If you want to have green space on these big areas that are left, then just take it. Make it 200-foot setbacks across the borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sir?
Good evening. I'm Philip R. I live on Meredith Avenue. First of all, thank you for having a special meeting on this again. I know you guys are working double time every month to do this. Appreciate the extra time for the public comment. I really wanted to talk about specifically about Section D1. First, as you started to talk about it, as Charlie mentioned at the beginning, one of the things you wanted to do was to protect the residential areas, and that's certainly commendable. That's one of the purposes of zoning in the first place. I want to support Susan Stern's comments that raising the issue of the status of roads, especially arterial roads, in terms of protecting, what's happening in terms of setbacks with those. And I don't think we've actually decided that, or you've actually formally discussed it or decided it. But I'm surprised to see in the new section here in D1, the first two lines say this section recognizes that Lancaster Avenue, US Route 30, is a unique road within Radnor Township that's intended to become a more pedestrian-friendly corridor over time. Now, I've been to all these meetings. I don't know if you've discussed it at other planning sessions, but I don't remember you folks deciding that or even discussing it. So I'm surprised that this is put in there now and is really glossed over. So I'd like to ask you folks to, not tonight obviously, but to actively discuss this, because I think it's an important issue about what is the purpose of Lancaster Avenue, especially in that section. When you think about it, here we have a couple of things that seem to be almost seeming inconsistencies. You want to make it more pedestrian-oriented, but we're doing that by lowering or by reducing the setbacks to 40 feet from 120. I don't know how that makes it more pedestrian-friendly to take less space to do that. Secondly, we're also targeting, this section makes no mention about what the uses are going to be in that section there. And of course, we know where it's going to be dorms. Well, later on, we find out that dorms are more intensive uses, and actually you provide for higher setbacks for dorms than other pieces of buildings. So why are we in a position of lowering setbacks for dorms when then later on in other areas we're actually increasing setbacks? It just seems like to be an inconsistency. We can go on for that for a little bit. I encourage you folks to actively debate that issue, not only for this section here, but it's coming down the pike on the other one. And I think I'm encouraging you or asking you to make a positive statement on what is your position about Lancaster Avenue, development along that, especially in that area there, and especially the types of development that will be there. This is not a classroom building that's vacated at the end of the day at 5 o'clock or 7 or 9 o'clock. This is a dormitory where people are going in and out. And you're putting 1,200 students there, or at least that's what the plan is. And at that point, I don't see that stretch of land becoming a little pedestrian area. That becomes a quadrangle. And that's a different kind of intensity of use right there at a major thing. So I encourage you to actively discuss that and not to accept blindly just this language. It just got slipped in there without any discussion at all. My concern is for safety. My concern is for traffic. And my concern is not for that intersection right there, which is also could be a very good bottleneck or a disastrous bottleneck for the township, but also for the spillover traffic and the safety that proposes to the parallel roads, including Conestoga Road, County Line Road, Montgomery, because it's going to go someplace if that becomes a bottleneck. So I appreciate your concern to that area, and thanks again.
Thank you. Other comment?
Hi, Jim Schneller. I live within a quarter mile of three of these largest, most affected zones, and I really do have to agree that it's perplexing that these other institutions haven't shown their faces. And I really would request that you at least get some kind of general written comment from them. And I think you'd be very surprised because they'd be forced to put some thought into it and tell us what they think. And because this is a really wide-reaching amendment that's proposed, while that might lengthen the time necessary, as you keep saying, let's do it right, and let's make it as least complex as possible. Someone mentioned that the D1 gave some special consideration to Lancaster Avenue. I have to say, I don't remember the language on page 1 of section 67B regarding to encourage the development of institutional uses in accordance with approved standards which protect the adjacent non-institutional uses. I think this is a sideward way of looking at the whole problem. Or at least you'd have to have A, B, and C. Protect adjacent non-institutional, protect the immediate region's traffic and comfort level, and then C, I'm just giving it for instance, C, protecting the greater district or two-district zone or the overall traffic and environment picture, comfort level included. And I thought it was interesting about height that no one mentioned, or it hasn't been yet mentioned, that we have no idea about what the tree cover is going to be like. You talk about the top of the hill with Cabrini or the bowl that Eastern's in. If tree cover just changed from normal attrition, I think for every 3 trees coming down, there's maybe 1 planted these days. So these things could be visible from a much greater distance. Where's that effect on adjacent residences? If you can see a 4th story, you're talking about 20 people who just lost their swimming pool view. And that's angry people, and that's also tax and et cetera. And then going along the same line, besides the special mention to Lancaster Avenue, you have a lot of environmental considerations there. When you have a nice plain of grass, like Villanova has right now on the north side, that is a great siphoning and cleansing pervious function that cleans all those hydrocarbons out that settle in from within 50 feet of a highway. When you're talking about a 40-foot setback with a huge pedestrian walkway, or necessary in some cases, this is flushing right into Ithan Creek. And I think that the people who live downstream from Ithan Creek, all the way down Marple Township, Springfield Township, they should be notified of this at once, because I don't care what the parking lot's been like. If you're going to increase the, I hate to say it, carbon footprint, they deserve a look, and the fish and the birds deserve a look. So I want to put in a general complaint that we are, as has been stated, we're really looking at what is a special interest idea. There seems to be no underlying reason except for expansion. These people have developed, in their past 10-year plans, they've developed at risk. They know what they're doing. Their studies are thorough. They shouldn't have a paragraph in their study classified that Radnor will bend. I'd like to mention of other townships stronger regulations. And I don't believe that our current ordinances are so restrictive. I think height is the worst thing that could happen for everyone, from the daily commuter to the residential neighbor to the person concerned about Conestoga traffic. No one has mentioned County Line Road. County Line will suffer immeasurably, and those people have had the luxury or the benefit of decent traffic, which has exploded in the past 5 years to my uneducated perception. So as well as Lancaster Avenue, these conceivable 50-foot neighborhoods, 60-foot setbacks could affect King of Prussia Road, Upper Gulf Road, Eagle Road. Radnor deserves better. we have to remember that for every story we're going up over 3 stories, that is an exponential increase in pollution and glut. And setting at lights is an exponential increase upon itself, where you've got 2 factors working. I believe I'm done. And thank you, Ed, for all your hard work. We really appreciate it. You've been a real benefit.
Thank you, sir. Any other public?
And if I can just add one clarification.
Yeah, sure.
The setbacks from streets are not proposed to change except where the parking lot is in Villanova to go down to a 40-foot setback. Part of the goal there is if there is going to be a building on that property at some point, we'd like to move it away from the houses to the south and closer to the road. The parking lot's ugly. You know, there's nothing to save there on the south side of Lancaster Avenue. If we have an attractive streetscape, pedestrian oriented on the south side of Lancaster Avenue and can push the building further away from the homes, I think everybody gains.
The Villanova petition that will be in front of you beginning of next year will be specifically dealing with those Villanova parcels on the south side. This ordinance amendment will have nothing to do with that. It may apply to other portions of Villanova, but the Villanova petition that you've yet to see will address those areas on the south side. So any discussion with respect to this ordinance impacting the land area that Villanova has submitted a petition for is a waste of time at this point.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any other staff or board comment? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Bob Morrow, Head of Facilities at Villanova University. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I want to assure you that all the institutions, and especially Villanova, are very interested in the planned institutional zoning and any potential changes to that ordinance. Villanova reps have attended all of the meetings so far, and many of my staff have also watched on TV, so we have been following this with great interest. We were told early on in the process that after all the proposed changes were presented, we would have an opportunity to comment, so we've been waiting until the end. If that's not true, please tell us how you'd like us to submit our comments. We have about 28 suggestions so far. The current PI zoning in Villanova in Radnor Township is one of the most restrictive we could find. We've checked the zoning ordinance of all of our competitive institutions, and Radnor's is by far the most restrictive as it stands today. We're sad to hear that most of the reasonable suggestions by your consultant, Mr. Schemmel, seem to be overruled by this commission. We feel that Villanova and the other institutions in Radnor Township are important contributing members to the Radnor community. We also have a significant positive economic impact on this community, and we're very disappointed that the process so far has been completely focused on the desires of the residents and pretty much ignores any needs of the institutions. Regarding tonight's discussion on setbacks, just two quick examples. Villanova currently has 19 out of approximately 80 buildings that are over 38 feet in height, and virtually none of them are more than 600 feet from residential property, but I don't think any of them have a negative impact on those residences. As an example, Tollentine, our main building, could you shift to the Villanova? Thanks. Tollentine, our main building, which is visible just to the left of the church on Lancaster Avenue, is about 5.5 stories. I don't know the exact height in feet. Right. Yeah, I think it's under the yellow line. Yeah, right about there. So Tollentine, which is about 5.5 stories, sits high on a hill, is well proportioned to the site, and we think is quite handsome and fits perfectly in the setting of our campus, but would be prohibited by this ordinance. Also, prohibiting buildings over 38 feet is very contrary to green building practices. We at Villanova committed to make all of our buildings at least LEED silver. This just makes that much more difficult. So in summary, we look forward to the opportunity to provide our input into the process at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Staff or board comment? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn?
Next meeting date?
Next meeting date. So, Kevin, would be? Give us both, because we have the holiday.
I think we're going to follow the same schedule into next year, which is the first Thursday of the month, if that is.
So it'd be the 3rd, right? The 1st is a Monday, right?
January 3rd, Thursday, 7 o'clock here.
7:30, I believe, or 7:30.
7:30,
You guys can decide, but
Well, when is the first planning meeting then?
the first planning meeting would
Be after?
be the 8th, the week after.
7th, 8th.
8th, I think.
Ed, before we
adjourn.
Thank you.
Well, you go first.
Wait.
so.
I don't feel like we've kind of closed the loop. We took in some public comment, and maybe a couple of minutes of us digesting or giving Charlie some. I, for one, don't feel like we've given Charlie any direction of anything. One comment I would have is to recommend that we delete all of the stuff in red that has to do with. There's a lot when you read in here that you can't help but feel is geared towards some of the things that Villanova, would like to do. And to Kevin's point, that's going to get superseded by the zoning ordinance amendment that Villanova has presented to the township. So it's just muddying the waters for it to be in here. If it ends up, in whatever fashion it ends up getting adopted by the township, once it goes through the planning process, it'll just be a subsection of this zoning. Isn't that, Kevin, they're putting it into its own
Correct.
little subsection?
The Villanova petition will be its own separate use within the PI, so it will have its separate regulations where they conflict with those regulations within the general PI district.
Right, so the stuff like, for instance, that whole D, and even where it references Lancaster Avenue, I would say just take it all out.
But there might be a situation where that ordinance that we plan to see in January, that nothing happens with it. It may not happen. And this is our chance to.
I agree with Susan that this was meant to be for the entire township, and we shouldn't have things that are specific to one particular planned institution. I think that should be handled elsewhere. I think that this should be. I thought that was our task from the beginning, was to improve the existing ordinance, not to tailor it to particular instances.
Well, the scenic roads are particular also. I mean, we already started down that path, if we go with that path, to preserve more trees on the scenic roads, that eagle and everything. So there's a road that's referenced in a different way than Lancaster, but it is referenced in this draft.
The other thing I wanted to just comment on is the gentleman from Villanova who commented about our ordinance being very restrictive. I can appreciate his position. I hope that all the institutions in Radnor can appreciate that. And I did the research on this when we did student housing, how vulnerable Radnor Township is to institutions because of the square mileage, the size we are, the population we are, and the number of institutions we have within the township for our size. There's a very different scale in Lower Merion Township, for instance. They have far fewer students living in Lower Merion for their population in their square area. So Radnor needs to be more protective, and also very different from Lower Merion Township. We do not have a conditional use process for every building, and that's very key down in Lower Merion, that all the things that they want to do down there are by conditional use. And maybe we want to consider introducing that process to Radnor, and that would perhaps allow Radnor to think about, be more flexible, because we have a process in place that provides protection. I'm not saying that's definite, but it's sure, maybe it is something for us as a planning commission to consider in conjunction with this.
The one concern I have is conditional uses open up a lot of opportunities for nuisance challenges, where someone just holds things up for years and years and years without, the township approves it, they put reasonable conditions, and one neighbor can hold up the project for years with a conditional use approval. It just opens up a lot of opportunities for people just to get in the way of the process after there's been public debate, discussions, and decisions.
Well, that might be something for us to better understand and be informed about that. I just wanted to comment on it before we shut down the meeting, since we were at 9:20.
Conditional uses
one
should be
small-
used for complex, controversial things. They should not be used for routine changes. In some communities, everything becomes a conditional use, and somebody wants to add an elevator to a building, they have to go through a conditional use process. That's the worst case scenario. It just adds to the expense, adds to the delay, adds to the administrative burden on the township, too. So you have to be careful not to overuse the conditional use process.
And then Mr. Morrow had also mentioned that Villanova and possibly the other universities have comments that they want to make during this process. Where does that fit in?
At any point in time, anybody can make or submit comments. I had envisioned that the universities were waiting for a more concrete drafts that they could look at. The ordinance that we have right now is kind of in a fluid state where we're looking at things and we're revisiting things as we get to one section of the ordinance. We haven't been through this draft as a complete draft yet, and we keep going back and revisiting. And we discussed in September the category 1s and 2 uses, and we rediscussed those tonight. That's why we're going to kind of move this along so we can get to a point in March where we have a complete draft that we can get in front of the commissioners, because I know that they're going to have some comments and suggestions, and they're going to make some changes, and they're going to send it back to you. So anybody can submit comments at any point in time. I figured that the universities were waiting for a complete draft to review and analyze the total impacts at one point in time.
As someone putting this together, my preference is the sooner we get the comments, the easier they are to respond to. Even if you're responding to something that's not in a final form, I'd like to hear the comments as early as possible.
I was just going to say we're partially doing this in a semi-vacuum. I mean, we do have some input, and we have some input from the public. I would rather have your 28 comments like tomorrow so that I can look at them in preparation for January. And I think it would give us an understanding of everyone's stakeholder status here.
Well, I remembered something else real quick. We got a very well-written, very well-thought-out email forwarded to us from Roberta Winters, who serves on the League of Women Voters, and about our process. And, for my own sake, I'll have to apologize, personally, that I don't know that we made it clear, has the public had an opportunity to sit down with Charlie or with the township staff to give their perspective and their thoughts on what would be good? Because to echo Skip, we are kind of working in a vacuum. We've mostly talked amongst ourselves, heard a couple of people in the public. I do want to hear from the institutions. And it literally dawned on me tonight, oh my God, why are they not commenting, telling us what they think? Charlie had said he hadn't been in touch with them. I didn't know if staff had been in touch with them. We probably do need to have an opportunity for the public to really come in and have a discourse, and not in this format. And maybe not even us in attendance, not necessarily at our meeting, but Roberta asked about that. Where was the public process for the public? And I was like, yeah, I don't really think we've had it yet. And the problem that I see often happens with this type of work is that we invest so much time in it that we all get very attached to the work we've done and the opinions we have, which doesn't make them inherently better or worse than anyone else's. It's just after you've spent 6, 7, 8 months working on something, it would be hard to hear somebody tell you, well, throw it all out and here's a completely different thought on the process. So maybe we should ask staff to give some thought to how they think we could best incorporate the public's more and the institutions, you're right, more active feedback at this stage before we get too wedded to the wording of the document.
That's always hard because you need to have something for the public to respond to, but you don't want to have a finished thing because clearly then you're not getting the feedback that you want. So, yeah.
I think we're not getting the public here because it's a process, and it looks endless. When should they jump in? They're probably wondering when they should jump in. They want to come in when to save it at the last minute, the 11th hour. This isn't going to work right.
All of these meetings are open to the public, so, this is the process where public comment should be heard at. In the manner of transparency, to have separate meetings with an institution or with a particular group, I think flies in the face of the transparency. You have it here where everybody can hear the comments and then read and react. Ultimately, the Planning Commission takes that comments, takes that feedback, provides Charlie with some direction to go back and revise it. So I think this is the proper forum, at which point, this is the first meeting I have seen no other representatives other than Villanova here. Usually there are several other representatives from the other universities here in attendance. They may not be saying anything, but they're sitting in the back. Everybody's had the opportunity at public comment. It's not just for the residents, it's for anybody that wants to come in and comment on it. So this is the forum for people to come in. We do advertise the meetings. People are welcome to submit comments to me. I will then forward them to the Planning Commission and to Charlie in that manner, but everybody's going to get the same comments at the same time.
Would it be better on the next meeting, rather than continuing to chew on the red, blue, and black, that we invite the institutions to actually make 10-minute statements as part of the meeting?
I'm flexible.
I'm asking
I'm not sure what
staff
you're going to
to-
hear, Skip. What do you think you're going to hear? The institutions are going to say it's too restrictive, and the public's going to say it's not restrictive enough. We know that. We were tasked, and don't forget, this started years ago with a committee, and then they couldn't get it done. The commission have asked us to do it this way, and I think this is the best way to do it. We may want to listen harder to some of the public, Colleen's comments. Maybe we should go paragraph, public comment, paragraph, public comment, paragraph, public comment. That may be better. Seems like we only got that one paragraph tonight, so we kind of did it Colleen's way. But maybe that's what we should do, and make it clear that next month we're working on section 1 and 2 and bring those comments. But I think we are doing that. Yeah, I don't think you want to do it any other way at this point, unless you want to go to a committee, but we have to go back to the commissioners for that, or bring it, like we did with Garrett Hill.
I mean, when a developer comes in, the developer gives a speech.
Yeah, but we went through this with Garrett Hill. Garrett Hill, the public.
Well, so I wasn't here for
Yeah, the
Garrett
small, the residents sat here, and was more the commercial side sat there, and we kind of went through it line by line, and there was always a disagreement. We finally got it done. It took 2 years, 2.5 years. Thank you. But it wasn't a bad process, right? It worked. It was painful.
Let me put it a different way. Rather than dedicating time to the institutions to speak, shouldn't we encourage the institutions to speak?
We're not discouraging them.
Well, okay.
If you want to call them and say, "Come on in,"
Please come in.
For my,
Institutions the same way
Yeah.
as the public. They would have
With-
an opportunity to
right.
comment the same way.
Yeah.
So
And anybody
speak
can
to your
submit written comments at any time.
cohorts and suggest that perhaps it's time for them to have their opportunity to speak.
yeah,
So-
absolutely. Okay.
Is there somewhere that on the township website we can kind of advertise this process and provide a link for
Well,
feedback?
it is. I don't know how much more you can advertise the fact
I
that we're
mean,
having
just
a
like a-
special Thursday night meeting to discuss this and only this.
But we just have that in under meetings, right?
Well,
But
That's what the meeting
just right up on the front website for a short amount of time. Just put something with your
There is
contact.
the upcoming events on the right-hand side of
Is
the
it in there?
webpage that will show the meetings 3 or 4,
Okay. And could you, with that, put a link, just, I know that this school district does this often. When they have an upcoming meeting, they say, please provide feedback in advance so that we can comment on it. I don't know that we can necessarily address the comments, but just to encourage people to email you any comments they would like us to consider during this process.
That's already there. If they click
It's already
on
there.
that link, it'll provide you to the staff liaison. In this case, it would be me and my email address. And there's also then a link to the agenda and any information that we have, we put up there as well.
So at that point, I agree that this process is the best we can come up with.
I guess,
I think we did that looking back on Garrett Hill, because Garrett Hill, part of the fact that it took so long is we put it on the regular schedule. And sometimes it was first and sometimes it was last. And, starting Garrett Hill at 9:30 sometimes at night was brutal. Or we did it first, everybody else, felt like they weren't getting a fair chance. So I don't know. I think this process, as good as it can be, taking up everybody's special time, including the public and the staff, for a special meeting. You couldn't highlight it any better,
then I do think moving forward, we have to think about doing smaller chunks and letting people speak and Smoach, alternating it, because I think it's discouraging for the people to sit for 2.5 hours. And, as Colleen said, it's a lot of comments to try to go over. And we've already hashed it out. We don't want to rehash it. But so then we're not really getting their perspective, institution or the public. I had no idea. If we've had institution representatives here, tonight is the first night I've ever had an indication, because I don't know everyone in the room. I know a lot, but not everyone. I had no idea we ever had an institutional representative here.
But you're on TV. They could be watching TV. They don't have
Oh,
to
no, I
just
know.
sit here.
And we've had no feedback from them. That's why
Then we must be doing a really good job.
Oh, is that it? Thank you.
How about that? We have one more comment from the public, please.
No, I just wanted to say, Ed, in the 2.5 years that Garrett Hill worked on it, we met every week for 4 to 5 hours.
Well, because you had, yes.
Yes, I mean,
and that's what we started with this, and then that committee was abolished.
We did, no, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
but publicly, when
the
we came...
implementation committee was
Correct.
going to do it, and Garrett Hill did it. But we put a tremendous amount
Absolutely.
of work, at least 4 to 5 hours every single week.
Yeah.
So I think that, and that was transparent and public within Garrett Hill.
Correct.
I'm not attending a 4-hour meeting. I'm not going to do
Once a week? Come on, Charlie. Thank you.
that one 5-hour meeting.
Any other comment?
Mr. Chairman,
last comment.
I looked at the calendar. We are scheduled for January 3rd at 7 o'clock. The 7:30 meetings were when we backed up to the comprehensive plan meeting to allow some leeway, but it is 7 o'clock on the 3rd. And I would be remiss if I did not thank you publicly for your service to the township and everything to this committee.
Thank
So
you, sir.
you.
I
And the
appreciate it.
board would like to thank you as well. We've been very pleased to have your diplomatic and professional leadership.
My best. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Anything else?
We don't think you'll be able to stay away.
I won't.
No.
I'll be right back there with everybody
I
else.
think at the next meeting,
Warm
he'll
me
be
up a seat, Colleen,
commenting.
I'm going to sit with you.
He'll be
try to look a
commenting
little
in the
less
public. Right,
we have a
next
motion
time,
to adjourn?
next time when we go to public comment, you're going to be the first
That's
one,
right.
right?
I'm the first one. A motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Happy holidays.